Okay, greetings, everyone. My name is Tiffany Landry. I'm the Director of Advocacy for the 6th District of the California State PTA. 6th District PTA supports all the PTAs in 4 counties. That's Santa Clara County, Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito counties. 6th District helps new PTAs get up and running. We make sure you have the officers you need, that your insurance gets purchased, and that you file your taxes, and especially that all your officers have training. PTA officers are never on their own when you learn your roles. And training ensures that volunteers of all experience levels have an opportunity to become PTA leaders. So 6th District is here to support you. And additionally, many PTAs have a council that helps support PTAs in smaller areas. So I welcome all the PTA members in attendance, and I thank you for all the volunteerism you do in service of the PTA mission to positively impact the lives of all children and families. If you're here and you're not a PTA member, I encourage you to join a local PTA. If you think of any questions as we go along tonight, please put them in the Q&A feature, and we will have time at the end to answer questions. Tonight, we have invited Lea Darrah, the California State PTA Director of Legislation, to talk to us about 2 yearly events, Legislation Conference and PTA Convention. When I first joined PTA, it was actually a couple of years before I ever even heard of PTA Convention. And when it did come up, it was right before a convention was about to start. And my fellow board members and I, we looked at each other and none of us knew what convention was. We hadn't put it into our PTA budget. And ultimately, none of us attended, even though it was being held, right down the road in San Jose. Now, I became a president at that PTA unit. And as president, I started attending my council meetings, because remember, your council is there to support you. And it was there that I started hearing more about convention, and later about the legislation conference. And I've since attended both events. And at these events, I've seen the way that PTA members advocate for all children, even the ones beyond our local schools. And that's great, because when we advocate for all children, our own children are included at the same time. And I learned about opportunities that I have to advocate for our students and for changes to our education system. And I met many people who were eager to support each other, to support me, and to further our mission. And all of the new things that I learned, I was able to bring back to my local PTA or community. Now, I know that most PTA members won't attend these special events, but I think it's important that all PTA associations know about these events and the way that they support schools, support students, and help to build up local leaders. It's also worth remembering that a fraction of the dues that we pay to our local unit support California State PTA events like convention, and plus many, many more. So just the dues that we pay are a valuable part of supporting PTA advocates. So that was my motivation for bringing this talk to our community. Lea Darrah, thank you for being with us tonight, and I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you to 6th District for inviting me tonight. You guys are Northern California like me, so it feels good to be helping folks close to home. So tonight I want to talk to you guys about how PTA is here to help. I have a PowerPoint to show you, and I will talk to you a bit about tonight what we'll be talking about. So I want to share with you a bit about my PTA story and the need for training. I want you guys to know how to use your voice and how to tell your story. Since we're in election season, I'll be sharing some election season do's and don'ts. I want to provide you some resources. I'd also like to go over our organizational advocacy goals for the term. And I'd also like to share with you the members of my Ledge team who are resources for you locally on a variety of subject matters and things that might be an area of interest that you could reach out to. So if we're ready to start the PowerPoint. Is it up? Oh, here it is. All right. So we can go to the next slide. I've already shown you, I'm here with you tonight, but I live in Davis. So like I said, Northern California PTA member like you. I serve on my school board as well as the California State PTA Board of Directors. And as my slide states, I have a big focus on equity, inclusion, diversity, and to really make sure everyone's voice is heard in our conversations. Next slide, please. All right. So this is a little bit of my PTA story, things I've done to advocate for PTA. In the bottom corner, you can see me with my little lei on, and that's when I started my PTA journey with my daughter, Brooke. She was a kindergartner, and the forms came home and said, would you like to volunteer? And of course I said yes. And so I became a regular volunteer in the classroom, and I was the volunteer coordinator in my first year of PTA. Over the course of time, I became involved PTA at a district and statewide level, but it was a very slow process for me because in my own community, my PTA units did not feel particularly closely connected to our district, nor did we feel particularly closely connected to state PTA. Although we knew they were there and they were a resource, we really kind of did things on our own and focused very much on the sort of local issues at our school sites and in our school district. The fundraisers, the book fairs, the fun nights, the family nights, science nights, those are the things that we saw, and we didn't always connect ourselves and didn't know to connect ourselves to the larger story of PTA. You'll see in the picture at the bottom center, this past year, we were able to do some advocacy work at the National Legislation Conference, and we're all in masks because we were in the Capitol, and we're visiting Representative Ted Lieu. And there were several members from our PTA Board of Managers and Board of Directors who came to the meetings. Over the course of time, most recently, the picture in the very center is the state president and I at a fundraiser and advocacy event for the Prop 28 ballot measure. And I was able to be there with Christina Aguilera. So you never know where your PTA journey is going to take you. Could be in the kindergarten room making leis and hats for the kindergarten tea, or you could be with a celebrity. Pretty cool. Next slide, please. All right. So as I talked to you a little bit about my own PTA journey, and I told you I came as just a mom, not that a mom's not a big thing, but I was the mom coming to school with my kindergartner. I had some of my own skills about maybe knowing how to talk to people back then, using your phone, make phone calls, typing on the computer to put together spreadsheets of lists. But some parts of my PTA knowledge were not really filled. And so I found that over the course of time, attending trainings, conferences, taking trainings even in my own local school district, and doing things on statewide level have really helped me better learn how to do my PTA job, both as a local leader and then as a statewide leader. And even now I attend trainings to make sure I have the most up-to-date information. So I encourage you as local leaders too, to attend trainings, conferences. I'll talk about a couple of key ones with state PTA, but your district will offer you many trainings, your school districts can offer trainings, and I really encourage you to take advantage of those opportunities. It's a chance for you to learn new things, to do your own PTA job better. And I think particularly it's an opportunity for you to feel well equipped. In some PTAs, you may be dealing with a budget of maybe $10,000, but some budgets have almost $100,000 or more. And we're asking everyday moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas and neighbors to run a small business, a nonprofit. And so I think that the more training you can get and the more up-to-date training you can get helps you to do your job better. And I've also found that at trainings, some of the best things I've learned besides what's been taught in the class is by sitting next to people in the class who shared with me their own experiences and best practices. Sometimes it's been encouragement or a funny or cute thing. In fact, I've seen some great spirit wear for PTA units and districts. And that has inspired me and encouraged me and helped me find sort of my people in the PTA world. Next slide, please. Oh, before I forget to say, I'm sorry. The other thing about PTA is sometimes there is a conversation at units that maybe investing money to go to training is quote unquote a waste of money or money that should be spent at the school site. But I just want to remind you that a lot of careers expect or recommend their members to continue to do continuing education. Whether you're a nurse, you're a pilot, even someone who's repairing cars, there's lots of continuing education that's required to do your job well. And I can't imagine that a PTA leader who's in charge of that budget and all the programs for the children at the school site wouldn't do better by being better trained. So I really encourage you to mirror your private sector jobs in which you do get training. So one of the first opportunities for you to get training at a statewide level will be the legislation conference in 2023. Currently, our date is either going to be the end of February or beginning of March. And you may wonder, well, why is the date not set? Every year in the past, the date was known. And yes, in the past, we were able to sign contracts 2 years in advance because conditions were normal. Since the pandemic has befallen us, the ability to sign contracts and make plans further out into the future has been much more hampered. And as an association, we try to be very careful about not signing contracts that we cannot fulfill. And at the same time, we want to ensure that all of our events are held in a way that is safest for our members. And that's all of our members. So that's why we've had to hold off a little bit on timing, but we believe that by having our conference into the February-March timeline, it'll be far enough from the winter holidays in case there is a spike in COVID, where it'll be safe for people to travel and gather and be able to hopefully buddy up with people at tables, do group work, listen to our legislators and our speakers come in and policymakers, and for people to feel safe and comfortable in that space. We will still maintain the California State PTA adopted rules for vaccination and mask wearing. That may be different than what's in your local community, but because State PTA is a statewide organization, we adopted our rules for the year in order to not change them repeatedly and make it difficult for people to make future plans. So legislation conference is an excellent opportunity for you to be back in person, an opportunity to connect with other local advocates. I think it's really important for you to get the chance to hear from policymakers and decision makers. And I think that it also provides you an opportunity to make that connection to your local legislators. So if you have that chance to come to Ledge Conference, you can actually either it'll depend on the conditions at the time, make Zoom meetings or possibly even in-person meetings with the legislators. Some legislators are now meeting constituents, so it'll vary based on the conditions at the time. And then, of course, my plug for you is that if you come to Ledge Conference, you will meet the coolest legislation team in the world, bar none. So do not miss it. Next slide, please. And then in April, we have our annual state convention. Now, convention is, I think, a very important way for you to be involved in PTA and to feel connected to what is happening at the state level. You have the opportunity to have high quality training on a variety of topics, whether it be a subject matter area such as education, hot topics in education, or student mental health. You may hear things about from our student board members. You also have the opportunity to hear about membership programs, leadership services, and then even some job specific training on how to be a president, a treasurer, a secretary. So there's quite a lot of great training there. Also, though, because it's a statewide event, there is a business meeting. So you have the opportunity to vote on items that impact the association, such as resolutions, which is what we base our authority on to do PTA advocacy. And at the past convention, the students brought forward a resolution on healthy meal choices. So there's ways in which it is an active process for you to be involved. But also in April, let's be honest, many local leaders are a bit tired and bedraggled. We have served all year long. We've done the book fair and the fun run and the math night and the science night, and we've dragged ice chests and coolers out, and we've taken field trips and cleaned up after harvest days, and we're tired. So convention is a time for you to refill and re-energize. Coming there and seeing the statewide level of all that's happening in PTA, getting excited, seeing the vendors, seeing what's new and what's hot, and seeing all those cool shirts that other people come and bring, and seeing the silly items that people bring, their spirit items, really is a chance for you to feel connected to something bigger. And I mentioned earlier that I started my PTA journey as a local leader where I didn't really have that connection to state PTA. So my very first convention, now I was definitely a bit tired by that day, When the students came out and did their reflections performances, I was in tears. Not in tears because I was sad, but in tears because I was overcome with the beauty of the artwork, the amazing students, what they brought forward. There were a few special artists that brought incredible interpretations that just were very touching. But then I looked around the room as I was thinking, what a weirdo, I'm crying, and saw that lots of people around me were either awestruck, smiling, faces of exhausted volunteers were just looking like they were so happy and proud to be there. And it made me realize that even though we're very different, each of us, in some ways we're the same. We want children to have the best, to succeed in the ways that are best for them. We care about children who we'll never meet. And we of course care about our own children and families. So I really think that coming to convention is an opportunity to really connect to the wider part of PTA and to feel sort of part of something much bigger. And again, this year there will be elections. So that's an opportunity for you as a local leader to have your say in who will be leading your organization as we move forward. Next slide, please. All righty. So I can't be the director of legislation and come to speak with you about without talking about using your voice. The first thing I want to say about this topic is to not be afraid to speak up for your students or the students at your school. And that can be done locally. In fact, the education code has specific requirements for parent engagement and stakeholder engagement. So you have a right to use your voice. And as you advocate for your own children, as Tiffany said earlier, you also could be advocating for children that you will never meet, but who very much need your voice raised to address issues that sometimes are difficult and sometimes take a lot of passion to be addressed. So you can use your voice locally at your school site, at your school district. I'm a board member. I hear people's voices all the time. You might come to your city council. It could be something on your planning commission. Just make sure that wherever you go, you're going to the right person who's a decision maker for what your issue is. It won't help you very much to worry about a school board issue, a school district issue at a city council meeting or vice versa. But if you do go to those meetings and use that voice that we've honed and we've gotten excited about, make sure you have authority to use your PTA title. If you do, you're welcome to say, I'm here from the Valley Oak Elementary School PTA. But if you've not been authorized to use that, you still may speak as a private individual. Just be very clear that you're not speaking on behalf of PTA. And sometimes you may drop into the PTA language because that's where you're comfortable. Just be very clear that you're here as an individual and these are the issues you're advocating for if you're not authorized to speak for your unit. And in all advocacy work, you need to be like the toddler who wants dessert. Be persistent. Don't stop. Keep coming back and asking again. And then even better, be like my granddaughter who asks for chocolate before kindergarten and then asks again when she comes home from kindergarten. Follow up. And then I think it's really important in the work that we do to share your advocacy wins. Of course, there's going to be some things that are disappointments and some things that won't go your way. But the way to gather people to you, to build your coalition of the willing and the semi-willing and then shy, is to share your advocacy wins. Tell them the ways in which things have been successful. Be honest about things that haven't worked. But when you do that, you draw people to you. And as much as you feel good about bringing one voice to a room, there's nothing more powerful than to have a school board meeting, a city council meeting, or a hearing chamber at our state capitol that is full of passionate advocates on an important topic. And then I encourage you whenever possible to remember to take pictures. If you don't like to be in the pictures, take pictures of others and post them on social media so that you share what you're doing. It is a great way to make sure that there's awareness of the issue, and photos can tell a story sometimes that a 20-word caption couldn't quite grasp. Next slide, please. Okay, so maybe this is going to be your first time advocating on an issue. Maybe you're going to come to that school board, or maybe you're going to go all the way to the state capitol. And when you do that, for some of us parent volunteers, people can be a bit nervous. You feel like, well, I don't know if I have enough knowledge to speak on this topic, or I don't know if I'm qualified. And I'm going to tell you that you are the expert of your story. Policymakers can get the data. Policymakers can get the spreadsheets and the all those facts. But what you can bring as a local advocate is your story of how things have rolled out in your community, how this cut would affect your child's school, how not having gender inclusive bathrooms has affected children in your communities, how you felt as a parent growing up and as you raised your children, and how this impacts you directly. And in those cases, you are the expert of your own story. So don't be worried if you don't know exactly how many kids need to use a bathroom, or how many people have almost been hit in the crosswalk. If you tell your compelling story of the time that you had to pull your child back from being hit in an unmarked crosswalk, or anything like that, or you have a very specific personal engaging story, that's where you can impact policy. And I tell you this because I went to a hearing about providing school lunches before the universal lunch program. At the time, charter schools were not required to serve the free lunch to the students, to all students. So I was in a hearing, and of course I was advocating to ensure that all students got lunches. And I thought I had an impassioned comment to make, and I felt so powerful that a little girl, a first grader in a bright yellow dress, gets me a little emotional, went to the microphone and talked about how she saw kids get the lunch every day, but she couldn't get it because her mom didn't have the money for the pizza and her mom didn't have the money for lunches. Even to this day, it strikes me emotionally that that child was able to speak up on behalf of herself and others like her who couldn't come. And I will tell you, it was very hard for any adult in that room, any member of the assembly, to not hear her. And to this day, I think of her as someone that I look up to as an advocate, because she told her story, she told a true story, and she told a story that hit you right in the heart. And I will tell you, since then, we have seen not only do charter schools have to provide lunches, but now all children have lunch in schools. So to me, even though that was several years ago, that has stuck with me this whole time. I can think of this little girl in her ponytail and her bright yellow dress. And she was brave enough to come all the way to Sacramento from down in Lemon Grove, California to speak. And you can be that same expert on your story. Next slide, please. All right. So again, since you'll be talking about legislation, and you guys may be looking at, we're at the end of a legislation session, but in this February timeline, we'll start to see more bills up again. And so if you're going to want to take a position on a bill or an issue, the first place to check is the California State PTA website to see if we have a position on the bill. And if we do, your unit can act on it without any further steps. You don't need any other further authority. If State PTA hasn't taken a position, your membership has to approve action to support or oppose a bill. And the way you need to do that is to do a study. So there is information in the California State PTA online toolkit that tells you, it's called How to Make a Study. strange phrasing, but that process is an important process so that when you speak on behalf of your PTA, you ensure that you hear both sides of an issue or multiple sides of an issue, and you ensure that your decision that you're coming to and conclusions you're coming to are based in PTA authority. And then that your community, whether it be your unit, council, or district who is doing the study, has the opportunity to hear all the arguments and then vote to either take a position or not take a position based on the results of the study. And I think that's a really important process. And sometimes it's a little unclear because state PTA rarely takes a position on local issues. And sometimes there are legislative matters that are local that can impact you, but we will not, as a state PTA, take a position on the item. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're in election season, and it's an important time for us to think about the election season rules. Most important to remember is PTA is nonpartisan. So people will ask often, well, PTA is mostly pretty liberal, so like, what's the problem? Well, while you can have maybe what might be viewed at times as liberal points of view, we welcome all members to our association, people from all different parties and walks of life. But in order for us to retain our IRS tax exempt status and to be able to receive tax exempt contributions, PTAs may not participate in any type of political campaign or other activity on behalf of or in opposition to a candidate for any public office, including those running for school board. And the reason I mention that is because frequently PTA volunteers and PTA members who are well known within their community eventually run for school board. And then they want very badly for the PTA president, who is their good friend or who was the last PTA president, to say, well, I endorse this candidate and I am the former PTA president of Sunshine PTA. unfortunately, that is not appropriate. You as a community member can endorse people, but you cannot use your PTA title. Next slide, please. So it's important that you not use your current title, but you may also not use your former title. And so some people will have argued about using their former title, but California State PTA has our own standards, which is higher than law. And in terms higher than law, meaning that we hold our members to a higher standard. And so if you were to do that, your unit could be in violation of PTA policy. But really what we're trying to do is ensure that you retain your tax exempt status. And we have to make sure that PTAs spend a non-substantial amount of their money even to do advocacy work, because the majority of our work should be supporting our children and programs at our schools. We are not we're not a lobbying group. All right, next slide, please. Since I will be providing this PowerPoint to you, and for folks who might want to see this online, these are some of the links to some of the topics I spoke about tonight. While I gave you the highlights, I think it's really vital for folks to actually look at the whole advocacy section and to look at the elections and campaigns, to look at the section on studying the issues, and then again, down at the bottom here, how to make a study. Because there are multiple steps, and it's not really very difficult, but we just want to make sure that you're aware of all the steps. And so frequently in PTA, our leaders find out after the fact that there was a rule they should have followed. So I thought maybe this would be an opportunity to help you and to also help those local leaders and even district presidents who are dealing with this as they have their unit leaders contact them, have these at their fingertips. I've been reached out to quite a few times this election season already up and down the state with folks asking about this specific topic. All righty, next slide, please. All right. So we're going to slowly click through these, but these are the association's advocacy goals for the 21-23 term. To advocate to achieve justice for all children, youth, and families to have their essential needs met. To advocate for shared power and belonging for all children, youth, and families to address the impacts of systemic and institutionalized injustice. Advocate for a full and culturally responsive curriculum to meet the diverse needs of our student population. To elevate the student voice and create an inclusive, positive, and supportive school climate, promote physical and mental well-being in early childhood, and to advocate for stable and sustainable school resources to bring California within the top 10 of per pupil funding. That last one is my dream and my goal. We got to get there. All right, next slide, please. These are our contacts for our legislation team. As you can see, after each person's name, the subject matter area in which they work is listed. So for example, Nita Abrick is our education advocate, as well as Beth Meyerhoff and Melanie Lucas. Brian Bonner is our family engagement advocate. Diana McDonald is our federal advocate. Marilyn Lucy works on ballot measures and initiatives, so she's been busy this year. Amy Rickard is our community concerns advocate, and Vanita Verma is our health advocate. Our advocacy team has taken people from up and down the state. Brian is down in San Diego, and Amy and Vanita and Melanie are up in, and Diana are all up in Northern California. So we have folks kind of up and down the state covering these various topics. And the great thing is some of our people come to this work with a lot of outside experience. Marilyn works for an assembly member. Amy is a social worker by profession. Beth is an attorney and a fluent Spanish speaker. And Diana is now a city council member and was a former school board member. Anita was a school board member. So many of our folks have quite a lot of information. And in fact, Brian Bonner is the vice president of the San Diego NAACP. So we have people who have a lot of outside knowledge and experience that can bring to their advocacy work and help them better serve you. So if you have a question, you can always send it to legislation@capta.org. But in truth, if you know it's an education question, you can send it to Anita, Beth, or Melanie. If you have a family engagement question, Brian is your guy. And if you have a health or community concerns concern, you can reach out to Vanita or Amy. A lot of people this year have been concerned about the vaping, and we have the ballot measure to eliminate flavored vapes. And Vanita has worked very hard on that. And when it became a ballot measure, then Marilyn took over from her end. So our team works really well hand in hand, dealing with important issues. And my youngest just graduated from high school this past June. And when I attended PTA meetings at my school site, what we talked about as parents was vaping and the bathrooms. So I know it's a topic that is very, very impactful to our families in California. And we would like to see a yes vote on the anti-vaping bill to ensure that folks are, that because flavored vapes tend to be appreciated by children and are very dangerous for children. All right, let's see. I think we are at about the end. Next slide. We're close to the end. Okay. Now this is the most important slide of my deck. Tonight, I will only be accepting easy questions for our presentation. So I'm assuming that some come into the chat, and I'm hoping that Tiffany gives me only softballs and easy questions.
All right, thank you. So please put your questions in the Q&A. When I ask that, sometimes they show up in the chat as well. So we'll try to get those answered as well. So I'll give you a little bit of time in the audience to enter your questions. I was really struck, Leah, when you said to be honest about your successes and your failures. And just recently, I attempted to write an op-ed in support of Proposition 28. And I did write an op-ed, and I submitted it to the paper, but it didn't get accepted. But I'm just so happy that I went through with it. You know, I feel like I've got some muscle memory now. It's the type of thing that I'll be quicker to think about doing it the next time around. But one of the things when I decided to write that op-ed, I knew that California State PTA had taken a support position, and I knew that that meant your team had already done a study. Mm-hmm. And so when I sat down to write, that was the first thing I looked for. I'm going to go find that study. And I read the study, and it told me all kinds of things. It listed PTA resolutions that were sort of the basis of why this is relevant to our mission. It had all kinds of links. I could go and read different reports. So I'm just so thankful that that resource was available to me. It was super, super important to get me started. And I know that you gave us the link of how to make a study, but could you talk a little bit more about what that looks like for your team when you do a study?
Sure. So generally speaking, studies come up out of the Legislation Action Committee. So that is a committee that I'm the chair of, and that has our president and president-elect, health, community concerns, education, and family engagement, of course. Duh. Anyhow, so those vice presidents, and they also bring in people from their commission who are what they call ledge reps. So that's representatives from their commission to help do our work. And then we have our legislation team. And then the rules are and others appointed by the president, but generally it's people who have some knowledge in some of the subject areas, or who have some experience with legislative matters, or who have a certain subject matter expertise that coming into the room would help better our conversation. So out of that committee, as a chair, I usually ask people who's interested, and what happens is the process is Marilyn will make a pitch for a ballot measure that we should probably look at, that looks like it's within PTA purview, it's something that we might have interest in, would be relevant to our members. And so she'll sort of make a pitch to the room about the item. And so then we say, okay, well, then we'd like to study this item. So then in that case, I ask for volunteers to take part in the study committee. And so then when that committee is appointed, those folks take on the role of researching the pros and cons of the issue. And they also research the PTA authority that would allow us to take a position on the actual matter. So in that process, it's a pretty deliberative process, and they work as a subcommittee and do their work. And then I know there's lots of Zoom calls and shared Google Docs and things, because sometimes I'm invited to them. And then they come up with a final recommendation from the committee. And once that's done, then that is brought to Legislation Action Committee. They present the committee report is presented, and then the committee as a whole actually votes on the recommendations. So in terms of process, I feel like it's a pretty well balanced process because we do take pro and con, or look at both sides of the issue, and we do take a lot of time to have a deliberate conversation around the report findings and the recommendations, so that when we can bring it forward to our members, we feel like it's been as vetted as we can get it for them, and that we feel we have very strong authority to move forward on any issue. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. It sounds very robust and very detailed.
Good.
And trustworthy, I think. So you mentioned that when a PTA member kind of goes out into the community, if they have authorization to speak on behalf of PTA, that they can. How do they get that authorization? What's that process look like?
Sure. So let's say there's been a need for a long time for a crosswalk at the far corner from your school. So right in front of the school, there's a crosswalk, but there's really been a need for one kind of around the corner from the school. It's a busy street and there hasn't been one. And there's parents have come to the school and talked about how unsafe it is. And there've been a few near misses, and a few parents have even kind of walked themselves out there to help make sure the kids get back and forth safely. And you realize, you know, there's the person who kind of says there ought to be a law, there ought to be something, right? So they often come to the PT meeting. And so maybe you guys decide to discuss this as a community issue. You know, the need for a crosswalk on the south side of the elementary school. So you can, as a PTA, decide that this is something that you could study the issue again, bring the information forward and say, you know what, we do need to bring this forward. And so then you can vote as an association to take a position, which is that we're going to work on advocacy work to ensure that there is a crosswalk on the south side of the school for safety and traffic control and, you know, ease of access to the school site. And so when the association actually votes in favor of that plan, that plan to move forward, then you can actually say at school board meetings and at city council meetings or a planning commission meeting or a meeting with the police department or the Safe Routes to Schools, saying, you know, I'm Lea Darrah, I'm authorized by my school PTA, I'm the president, and these are our issues and our concerns. Because otherwise, maybe it's something like you personally, the PTA president, doesn't like the bell schedule. If the bell schedule only 30 minutes earlier, it'd be way easier for you to get to work on time. Let's just say. And, you know, you are a longtime volunteer, you work very hard for the school, and you know that they could just have the school start 30 minutes earlier, all would be well. You are not, just by virtue of being the PTA president, authorized now to go to the school district or to any deciding body to say, because I'm the PTA president at Johnson Elementary School, I know that this is what everyone needs, because you're not authorized by your membership to do that. And likely if you had that same conversation with your school community, not that one school could change the schedule, but let's just say you would hear a diversity of opinions. And for some children, that might be unreasonable. Some kids might need more sleep in the morning. So anyhow, those are the reasons why you want to make sure you have your authority. And it can become difficult because in small communities, such as my own, people know you. If you've been on the PTA of what seems like every school as your kids have grown over the years, people are like, oh yeah, that PTA lady. So that if you are speaking on a personal issue, you want to make sure that you come in as an individual and say, I'm speaking on my own behalf, my family, my experience. Whereas if you're coming in to speak on behalf of the PTA, that's a different conversation. It's a different way you should identify yourself.
Thank you.
Sure.
So questions come in about the cost of LegCon and convention. And the question is, has there any chance that LegCon and convention would ever be combined into one event to try to reduce cost?
Well, let me tell you a couple things. It takes a lot of man, woman, human power to run convention. As we have seen in cost-saving measures, we've kind of reduced the size of the board of managers. We have even less people to volunteer to do things. And the people who used to come out to volunteer for convention for a free day of attendance don't seem to come out in quite the same numbers. Maybe it's some COVID concerns, we're not sure, but there's not as many people. So we're really barely staffed to run convention. So to add on an additional event at convention would be pretty difficult just by sheer manpower or human power. The other part of that, though, to consider is that us ledge folks are a special breed of people. And we're looking for a certain kind of conference that brings in legislators, and we really have to set that schedule around legislators and policymakers' schedules. And convention has its own set of very important and very rigid timelines to ensure the business meetings are done, everything is done in a certain way. And so, although I know National PTA did do this year, because of the 125th anniversary, they did do a LegCon prior to convention. Even that was not overlap because it's very difficult to do in terms of the logistics. And I think that also we have to think about the ability for our volunteers to be gone. Most family members, most people who with families and other commitments and jobs can only be gone for X number of days in order to be at convention. And so to tack on some more days for our Ledge conference would also be very difficult for folks to be able to afford the hotel nights and the days away from work and away from maybe other possible family concerns. I know in the first years I went to convention, I literally had a calendar written out with each day of the week and all the different activities, sports, and drop-offs and pickups that my husband and friends had to cover so that my children could get where they need to be safely. Now, I'm not saying that everyone has that concern, but that definitely is a concern.
And I think it's worth mentioning that in my experience over the last several years, convention alternates every year between Southern California and Northern California. So my guess is that that's intentional, and then it helps make it fair for travel costs.
Absolutely, right. Definitely, for sure. We move north and south. Generally speaking, conventions in the southern part of the state have more attendance. And Northern California has, we're a little smaller and mightier. But I appreciate the opportunity to kind of do that both ways. And because we'll be in Sacramento this year, I hope to see a huge showing from 3rd District where I'm from, 6th District nearby, and some of our other fellow districts that are up in Northern California, because it is just a quick 2.5-hour drive to Sacramento. But I don't know if any of you taken advantage of the train, but I've taken the train from Davis to San Jose, and it's actually quite a great way to go. So and inexpensive as well.
What about if a group of people wanted to just make it a single one-day trip, so there was no overnight accommodations needed? Would that be a reasonable way to attend convention or legislation conference and get a good experience out of it?
So do you want my honest answer, or do you want the party line?
I want your honest answer.
My honest answer is, if you come for the whole conference, because there's nothing worse than FOMO. You don't want to miss out on an important part of the conference. The conference is absolutely the conference and the material you receive in the conference. And then there's a whole second part of the conference, which is in the evening, at dinner, over drinks. You don't have to be a drinker, soda, glass of water, but you sit and chat. And that's where you get the real. That's where people tell you how it's really going, who they know, who their connections are. Those conversations, to me, being a local unit leader who didn't really have those connections to my district and state PTA, really helped me understand the bigger picture. It gave me so many more resources. And in times when I felt kind of alone as an advocacy person in my area, I was kind of the weirdo, I had my other weirdos. We were connected. I love my weirdos. I say that with lots of affection. And that is how I connected to those folks. And in those conversations is when I have felt the deepest value in PTA. Of course, the training was important, but sometimes a chance to debrief. I've sat with Erwin, I've sat with other folks and talked at, evening mixers. Those conversations are the things that have really helped me stay connected to PTA and understand better. So I really think that if you're doing a group thing, the hotel rooms are very reasonable, and units can afford to pay for it in most cases, and they're investing in their leaders. And I want us to think a little bit about how people have been feeling after the pandemic about work. People can take a job or leave a job. It seems like easier than they ever have been before. So how about the free job that you do that benefits all the children in your community? Now, of course, thank you is one of the most important and easiest ways to make people feel valued, but investing in our volunteers and giving them experiences, letting them take a field trip to learn about PTA really is not about a free vacation, because I have never met a PTA volunteer who vacations at one of our conferences. We work you from the morning till the night and then up early the next morning. But the opportunity for you to meet colleagues and friends, to share resources. I've had folks in other parts of the state give me information that I would have never had at my fingertips. And now I look forward to seeing these same faces at conferences, sometimes in Zoom boxes and sometimes in person. So I really encourage folks, if you're able by any way possible to attend the whole conference, to do it. And at convention, if you only attend for one day, you cannot vote. Our voting is only offered to people who are full-time attendees. So why would you spend all the money and time to come to convention and not benefit from the opportunity to vote and vote on the officers who rule your association and on the resolutions that matter? So if I were you, I would really encourage people to be there for the whole time.
Thank you.
Sure.
Erwin has a couple of clarifying questions. Can a local PTA take a position that's contrary to what California State PTA has taken on that same position?
Yes, but as I stated before, they would need to do a study. Normally, local units can automatically adopt positions taken by California State PTA. But for example, sometimes there are bills that may have, although an overall good statewide effect, might have a negative effect to certain communities, sometimes about taxes or different things that can locally affect units. So the unit then has to do a study, and they are asked to submit the study up through channels so that we're aware of what's going on. But I do know for a fact that in the past, there were some proposed funding mechanisms for education funding that by the whole would have enriched most students in the state, but some of our districts would have not seen that same outcome. And they did have the authority to do a local study and then make a decision locally.
Okay. Erwin also mentions that California State PTA had a vaping resolution, and a little bragging that came out of 6th District and specifically Palo Alto Council. Julie observes that the legislation process here seems a lot like League of Women Voters, how they operate. Do you know about League of Women Voters? Is it kind of similar?
Yes, I don't know as much about League of Women Voters as I do about PTA, but I do know some because frequently PTA actually works with the League of Women Voters to do candidate forums. And in many of our rules and guidelines are similar. So it's actually usually a very great partner for PTA to work with their local League of Women Voters to do candidate forums in advance of elections so members can be informed. And because you invite all candidates and there's no preference for any certain candidate, then it really becomes a nonpartisan activity. Does that answer your question? I couldn't tell you what year they were founded. I can tell you what your PTA is founded.
Thank you. There's some sirens in the background, so I hope that's not interrupting here.
I think they're just cheering us on. We're doing great.
Let's see. Erwin also asks, would you say a few words about some of the important things PTA advocacy has achieved over the years? Sure.
Well, I mean, you can start at some of the school lunch programs, and in sometimes that have been very controversial, AIDS education, information on supporting the rights of LGBTQ+ students. We did pass our first association sponsored legislation to ensure family engagement is called out in education code and more clearly defined. We've also worked on school lunches from the past, but even and more recently to work on the universal school lunches. We really saw a huge importance in advocating for that. And actually, just as the pandemic was starting in March of 2020, some of the California State PTA leaders, and myself included, were in Washington, D.C. advocating to ensure that the school lunch program continued even as schools were shut down. And of course, we did not do it by ourselves, but with many other partners calling out the importance of school lunches for children and nutrition for children during the pandemic. I think that was a huge win. I mean, there's so many things over the years that California State PTA has advocated for that that I'm very proud of. But I think, starting when our founding mothers got children out of the factories and into school, and then made sure they had meals, and then over the course of time, really advocated for children. And as we've merged with the Congress of Colored Parents, I think we became more diverse and more inclusive and more aware of some of our blind spots as an organization. And I think that we have endeavored to be more diverse and continue to advocate for people who have less rights and less access to the future that all of us deserve.
Thank you. Something I've heard at my own PTA is that they really want to support our students who are in our school. And when I was reflecting on, how have I seen students showing up at convention, one of the first things I thought of was the Reflections program. And I know it's a popular program, but not all PTAs have it. And it's an art program where, it's to promote art in every home, right? Mm-hmm. And for all the benefits it brings. Could you speak a little bit to the art program and what someone would see when they go to convention for Reflections?
Sure. Well, Reflections is amazing. I have had the honor of getting to be a judge at the Reflections art that was submitted to my district, and it was just incredible. I would look at things and I couldn't believe that a kid could draw so beautifully, or write poetry, or some of the video performances I saw of students doing dances or interpretations, just amazing. So when you go to convention, there's usually a gallery up, and every time at convention, I've mentioned, we're a little bit human power short. We're a little bit worked hard. I think Eric Thompson could agree with us. Linda, also the district president, could agree that we're running a bit ragged. And when I need to collect myself and recenter myself and remember exactly why I'm at convention, I tend to walk through the Reflections Art Gallery. And it's beautiful. And sometimes it can take your breath away. Sometimes you just wonder about the child who had this vision to create and share. And then we also have performances and submissions by our special artists. So children who may have some possible disabilities or different qualifications that would allow them to enter that category. And sometimes the challenge the child faces is quite profound. And then to see the art that comes out of a student who maybe couldn't always show you that part of themselves is just, it's very emotional, it's very amazing. And I think it's an opportunity for us to remember that it's not a competition, it's really a showcase. It's a chance for us to show what is inside of our kids. And for some kids, the reason they come to school is art, whether it's performance, music, drama, drawing, painting, sidewalk chalk, and graffiti. So there are kids who want well-meaning and controlled graffiti, please, but you know what I mean? I mean, some kids have different ways they want to show the artist in themselves. And so for me, Reflections has been such an opportunity to see that and appreciate it. And while I am a bit of a craft person and I can follow dotted lines, I unfortunately am not much of an artist in the traditional sense. I could do a couple of awkward interpretive dances and that's about it. So for me, particularly, I really appreciate seeing the artwork that comes out of these students from across cultural, social, economic, geographic barriers or distances or differences. They show these things and I'm always blown away.
Yeah, I agree. At a convention this past spring, I was always going over to the Reflections area whenever I had time so that I could see all the artwork there. Erwin has asked, has California State PTA President Carol Green, we've heard that she submitted also an op-ed to the San Jose Mercury News for Proposition 28. I tried as well. Has she done that to other newspapers across the state?
Yeah, so I believe, don't quote me but she said to me, so I should remember, I think one went into the LA Times, and I think to the San Diego paper down in her area. I'm guessing, shouldn't assume, because you never should assume in PTA, but I'm guessing that our communications department probably provided this op-ed to several large newspapers up and down the state. So I couldn't name for you exactly off the top of my head which ones. Sometimes in my job of delegation with Director of Ledge, I don't know all the granular detail. I see the op-ed, I agree with the facts in it, and then it goes off into the magic ether. So I couldn't tell you exactly where, but I know it's being submitted several places. And Carol, our state president, began her career as a reporter, and she's a media person. So you can only imagine that it is absolutely a moment of pride for her to speak on this topic, because it's also something near and dear to her heart, as she does drug abuse and alcohol abuse prevention work.
Thank you. And we've made it through all the questions in the Q&A, and I don't see any more in the chat right now. So I'll close with one last question. And this was one that I heard in a podcast recently. It's maybe a little bit of a hard question, I'm not sure. But it's what's the question that nobody asks you but you wish they would?
I don't often get asked why I do this work for free. And the answer I would give you is that it's very fulfilling. It's challenging. It forces me to learn lots of different things. I have ADD, and as an adult, I find it really engaging to do all kinds of different things and to balance about 7 balls in the air at once. It's except for when I blink and they crash. Most of the time they're up in the air, and I really enjoy that. And over the course of time of doing PTA, both locally and statewide, I have made deep friendships, people I could call in the middle of the night for an emergency, and people who've shown up for me at very difficult times in my own life. So the friendships and the colleagues and the sense of meaningful work, you know, when my PTA career is done, I will definitely look back on this with a lot of pride, and knowing that I have done important work, and that when I hand it off to those next leaders, because you guys are coming up, that you will take the baton and keep going, because we work with such a strong mission, and we work not only for our own children, but for children that we may never meet. And to me, that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that we are all volunteers. We do all of this work for free. And I think some people might be surprised to know.
I think so. Yes, I go to things with other folks who are paid in the same work that I do. And I've been asked on panels before we start, so they paying you yet? And I said, my answer is they can't afford me.
All right, so thank you. This has been an engaging conversation. Thank you to everyone who contributed questions to the discussion. And thank you, Lea Darrah, for joining us tonight. We appreciate the opportunity to learn about these PTA events, and we give you a virtual round of applause. Everyone, please put your notes of appreciation and your goodbyes in the chat. And we have recorded this event, so we will post it soon on the 6th District PTA YouTube channel. And please save the date for Thursday, November 10th at 6:30 p.m. 6th District PTA, in collaboration with Santa Clara Valley PTA, will be back here on Zoom hosting a talk with Santa Clara County Supervisor Joe Simidian. Supervisor Simidian will present his 13 tips for successful advocacy talk, and it has a focus on practical tips that folks can use the minute they walk into a policymaker's door. And this talk will be broadly relevant, so please share it with everyone when the registration becomes available. We would love to have the opportunity to show off the kinds of valuable material that PTA brings to the community. So please share that when it gets posted. And thank you again, Lea Darrah, for spending time with us tonight. And we will close out the Zoom momentarily.
Thank you very much, you guys. Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.